Hello, and welcome to Comforting Hearts Conversations. My name is Ann Blahos, your host and best-selling author of To Die For, The Gifts of Being Present Through Loss and Grief. Today, we are joined by Cheryl Lafferty Eckl. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you very much for having me, Ann.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. So first, before I get into the questions, I'd like to introduce the audience a little bit more to you. So I'm going to read your bio. Cheryl Lafferty Eckl is an award-winning author of 9 books, a mystical poetess, inspirational speaker, and workshop facilitator. She is a former singer and actress, personal life coach, and worked in business as a management trainer. A longtime student of the spiritual paths of East and West, Cheryl holds a master's certificate in transpersonal psychology and is passionate about helping others achieve reunion with their true self. She lives in Montana. And so I love the way we met. We met through a really dear friend of mine who happened to sit next to you at the airport in Montana. And I'm really blessed that Suzanne connected us because I think we spent more time having conversations, and just it was an amazing mesh between I think our views on philosophy about life, but then also too, you brought a whole level of experience that I really wasn't. I haven't experienced yet, and that's really the loss of a spouse. And so today I'd like to talk about that because you've taken that experience and have offered it, I think, as such an incredible gift to all of us. So you mentioned that you had written 9 books, and so the first book that that really was a part of this series is a book. Let me just hold it up really quick. It's a book called A Beautiful Death, and I love it because it's really the start of the story, but it certainly isn't the end of the story.
No, and of course that's one of the things that we discover is that all endings are also beginnings. And this was the first book, and I had a vision of writing this book and had no idea that it was going to turn into 9 books. But yeah. I just kept going and kept listening and kept writing down what I heard, and here we are 10 years later with 9 books.
Yeah. All based upon an experience that most people dread, right?
It's a club no one wants to join, for sure.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to do, I mean, I'm going to ask a few questions, but the first thing that I'd like to do is, because I feel like I learned a little bit about, and I'm trying to learn more about alternative methods to help people to move through these amazing spots of anxiety or grief that you get stuck at. And so I'd like to read a little bit from A Beautiful Death, and it's A Touch of the Divine. It's that chapter. So I'm going to read really quickly here.
Okay.
The basic instruction is to rest briefly with that suffering in your heart where you feel it being consumed. Then on the out-breath, you visualize all your own positive qualities of love and kindness, compassion, and health being released out to the one in pain as rays of love, light, and healing energy. You try to see the other person as being released from his or her suffering, now surrounded in joy and a sense of well-being. You can repeat the process for several breaths in formal meditation practice, or as a Buddhist nun and teacher, Pema Chodron, says, you can do Tonglen on the spot for people who happen to cross your path. You simply breathe in their pain and send them comfort. You can also extend this blessing to groups and cities and nations and continents, even the entire world. I have to admit about being a bit concerned, as are most people who try this technique for the first time, that willingly taking in the negative energy of another person's illness and anxiety would make me sick. But apparently this doesn't happen. Instead, you stop recoiling from suffering. You own as well as that of others. You learn your own as well as that of others. You learn how to enter into pain, allowing it to flow into and through your heart, whereas transformed into compassion for all of those who suffer and blessings for the one who is willing to hold that attitude for the entire human condition. So I know I read just a snippet on the whole technique, but I'm fascinated by how, you kind of just can jump in and remember something at this time and then go into it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process?
Well, one thing about the remembering, when I had the vision of writing A Beautiful Death, it was in 2006, right after we found out that Stephen's colon cancer was terminal. He'd been diagnosed in 2004, and we thought he would be fine, and then the cancer came back with a vengeance, treatable but not curable. So I had the vision of writing a book. I was told that his part of the mission was to go on because he was done, and mine was to stay and tell the story. So I had always journaled, but now I knew I needed to write everything down. And it's a good thing, because when I went back to the journals, I would not have remembered a fraction of what I wrote down as it was happening, and I would not have remembered it in the sequence in which it happened. Many things, many realizations actually came to me much earlier than I expected. So this technique of Tonglen is something that I found in a book actually by Ken Wilber, his book called Grace and Grit, about his wife Treya's battle with breast cancer in the 80s. And they did it, and I thought, well, it worked for them, I can try this. So the point is that it's not our human self that's doing it. This technique is happening on the inner. So the reason we don't get sick is that we're not humanly taking in someone else's suffering or illness or dis-ease. We're taking it into the flame of our heart and visualizing our heart as this fiery furnace of transmutative energy that will consume this darkness. And that's why we sit with it a bit, not to feel it in our physical bodies, but to feel it in our spiritual heart. And when we feel it consumed, then what we're breathing out is the transmuted energy of light and love and healing and happiness and joy.
Wow. Wow, there's so much to unpack there. I realized as we began talking, I didn't allow for the first, really probably the most important part of this whole story, and is that's really a bit about you and Stephen. And how this, so maybe a little bit about your guys' story, and then I'd like to come back to another question, because, well, let's start with that question. Tell us a little bit about you and then about Stephen.
Okay, well, let's see, where do we begin? We met here in Montana in a spiritual community that we were both members of. And I met him actually about 10 years before, or 10 years after. He had been a part of the community, but he was in a teaching center in Chicago. And many of my friends knew him. I never met him. And I'm convinced that that was angels keeping us apart until the time was right. So I met him in 1988 and then didn't see him for a couple of years. And when I first met him, of course, he was quite a bit taller than I was. He was a full head taller and wore glasses. So when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see the eyes of my beloved. I knew he had a nice smile. And I thought he was very handsome. He's a very handsome man. Matter of fact, want to see a picture of Stephen?
Oh my gosh, sure, yeah. Let's bring him in.
Let me just show people this picture of my beloved Stephen.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, this was on our wedding day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I didn't see him for a couple of years, and it happened that we were in a church service, and I happened to notice him sitting a few rows in front of me. And I thought, wow, his aura looks really different, because he was working in a different department then. And as soon as I said that to myself, I heard that inner voice that I call the wise inner counselor say to me, he's the one.
Oh my.
And yeah, pretty startling. And I've heard that voice at pivotal times in my life before, and it doesn't lie to me. It may shock me, but it doesn't lie. So I thought, wow, what do I do now? I guess I need to get to know Stephen Eckl a little better. And as it turned out, we were working on a project that did bring us together in 1990. And different things happened, which I tell quite a bit about in A Beautiful Death. But the upshot of it was that we were both interested in each other, but then got some direction from our teacher, and he started ignoring me completely. And I went, okay, well, so much for that. So much for him being the one. I guess he wasn't. I've been wrong before. And so I just surrendered it. And I thought, I wanted to be married. I had been married shortly for a while, a few years before, and I loved being married. Was married to the wrong person, but I loved the idea of being married. And I wanted to be married again, but I thought, okay, fine, forget it. Whoever this person is that is my beloved is not here. And so I just surrendered it. And then a few weeks later, I saw him and he came up to me and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I went, "Oh golly, I'm really in trouble now." And he said, "I think we're supposed to be together." And we got married 3 weeks later.
Wow. And so how long were you guys together until some of the illness started to impact you?
Yeah, we had 18 years together.
Oh, so that's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you've lost other people in your life.
Mm-hmm.
How is it different losing a spouse?
I think it depends on the relationships that you have with other people that you've lost. So I can only speak for myself, but I think probably the biggest difference in losing a spouse, and I've talked to many other women who have lost their husbands, is that it really is that thing of the relationship that when you get married, two do become one. You know, you take on the other person's gifts, you take on their karma, you are in this together. And for me, losing Stephen was like having my heart amputated. And it really took me a couple of years to feel like I was growing back a heart that was mine and his. I know, just a couple of years after Stephen died, I went with my mom to Sun City. Actually, I went to visit my mom in Sun City. And we went out to lunch at her senior living center with a number of her friends. And there was an unspoken awareness that they understood, because I think they were all widowed. Many of them were on their second marriage with another person who had also been widowed. But there was this understanding that when you lose your spouse, it really is the other half of you. And especially if your spouse happens to be your twin flame or your twin soul, which we can talk about whenever you want to. But for me, losing Stephen was literally losing half of myself. And one of the things that I wrote in the introduction to A Beautiful Joy, my most recent book, is that I've come to realize that, yes, he took half of my heart with him, but he left me half of his. Part of the journey that
Right.
I've been on these many years, so what is it, 11 years almost since he's been gone, is integrating with this combined heart now, that half of me is with him in the etheric and half of him is with me in the physical. And we're whole on both sides of the veil. And that's actually a process that it's taken all of these years for me to really integrate that, come to understand what it means, and to be able to articulate it. So my being able to say that is only something I've been able to say very recently.
Wow. Wow. I had so many questions I want to ask you, but I keep finding when we talk like this that there's so much to learn and to understand. I think, when you talk a little bit about the beginning of your relationship with him, and that you had that shared space of spirituality, that was probably a beautiful start. Maybe not exact same beliefs, but probably commonality in beliefs for sure.
Well, very similar, yeah, and that's actually an essential part, especially for people who are twin flames, or as I talk about the beloved, that we may not know our twin flame in this life, but every relationship can stand in for that. And the thing that I've really come to understand is that for us to become more whole, what we're looking for is wholeness joined with wholeness. That's what really makes a great relationship, whether it's your friends, your family, your spouse, whoever it is. The more whole we become, the more we can attract wholeness in other people, and especially in our spouse in a romantic relationship. that it's the seeking for the divine beloved that resides in our heart that leads us to the human beloved in a way that eventually the two of us, the real goal is for the whole one on one side, the whole one on the other side, is to be able to join that wholeness. And that's what actually, can bring the ascension and, whatever the highest goal of spirituality is. But that's why I talk about transfiguring love, because it's the path of divine love that leads us to let all that's less than love keep falling away.
Yeah.
Keep falling away until there's less and less of the human and more of the divine. That's really the path. And that's what Stephen and I, that's to sort of answer your question, that's really what we understood as the goal. I would have to say we came to understand it a whole lot better once we found out that he was dying. It kind of focuses your attention on what's really important. But especially, we had 4.5 years of his total illness. And during that time, we grew a lot, we gained a lot of insight. And I think by the time he left this world, there was a lot we understood.
Mm. Yeah, that's some depth that I can imagine that, is extremely valuable. I mean, which I would highly recommend, reading, this series of books that you've done on this, because I feel that it does take you through that process. And although, I think it's sort of like 3 books, right? It's the beautiful, I should have explained this, right? So there's the beautiful death, which is the first one, then there's the beautiful grief, and then there's the beautiful life. And I think that it kind of speaks very clearly to the process of, accepting, making sense of, embracing, and then living, the life that really, that you've been given to live. So as you guys started to negotiate this, this piece of information that could potentially be the end of his life, and in particular at the end, had you had, besides your spiritual discussions, were there like these practical discussions that you had? I mean, the stuff about what do you want, and the fear, and the, I don't want to leave. I mean, those kind of discussions too. I mean, was it all spiritual? Or what was the part on that very basic physical level too? How did that play together?
It's both all the time. And one of the things that I think people will really appreciate about A Beautiful Death is Stephen's ability to walk his humanity and his spirituality at the same time. As he got sicker, there was a point he even articulated to me. He said, my body is really afraid of dying, and my soul is so excited about where it's going. Mm. And I thought that was remarkable, because I think that's one of the things that's so puzzling for people, not just the person who is making their transition out of this world, but certainly the people who are caring for them, because especially as a caregiver, you're face to face with the physical all the time. And
correct.
Especially if you're being the primary caregiver. I mean, even with Stephen, I thought, wow, this is a lot more nursing than I ever thought I would end up doing toward the last couple of weeks of his life. We had hospice care, and they were fantastic. But I was a sole caregiver, because that was one of the things that we talked about that we wanted, because this was so much our journey. Yes, it was our families and all of that. But one of the things that the hospice people really helped me with, they said, you have 3 jobs. The first job is Stephen. The second job is you. And if you have any time or energy left, the third job is everyone else. And which meant I prayed a lot for other people, because taking care of Stephen's needs and mine was pretty much time consuming. And with Stephen, a lot of it for me was staying out of his way. Now, this is not true for everybody, but Stephen was a very private person. And so he didn't, and I put in the book, he didn't like to be clucked over. He didn't want to be a mother hen. And because I want to make everybody happy, and I want, I'm a real doer. And so it's like, well, there's got to be stuff for me to do. And once he stopped working and was at home, a lot of what I needed to do was simply to be with him and to read to him and to focus on our spiritual path, because that at that point was his focus. Now, he kept working until a couple of months before he died, which was extraordinary. I mean, the last month or so, he really should have been home, but he had other reasons for continuing to do that. But it was very important to, as I put it, not poison today with the probable sadness of tomorrow.
Ooh, say that again.
To not poison today with the probable sadness of tomorrow.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
it's so easy to leap into the future, and even though you don't want your beloved to leave, you do want them to be out of pain, and you want yourself to be out of pain. And that's one of the things why I used my journaling, because I was able to complain and moan and worry and fret in my journal and keep emptying myself out of all of those very human emotions. And I put some of it in A Beautiful Death because I wanted to tell the absolute truth of what we went through. But what I discovered is, you're going to have these thoughts. I wish they would go ahead and die. God, don't let them die.
Mm.
And that's just part of it. And so it really sort of becomes almost a tonglen for yourself, is allowing those negative thoughts to wash through you, but don't let them take up residence. So it's always moving. I mean, that's something I learned about grief, is it's emotion, it's energy in motion. So, we're grieving the loss before it happens. So all of these different things are moving through us, just as different experiences are moving through the person who is dying. Yeah. And so negotiating that, I learned that I had to really pay attention to what was going on with me and process it, not stuff it. Because, if you stuff it, it just pops out at really inopportune times. So I had to keep processing what was going on with me, so that when Stephen did need something, when he did express a wish, a desire, a thought, I could be present. Mm-hmm. And that was my big lesson. Really, that's, for living life to the full, of carrying on from now, is I really learned that in those 4.5 years.
That's really, what you're saying is, I think, really, really relevant. There's two things that I'd really like to point out from that. One is you're talking about the journaling, and I had a beautiful interview with a woman who's an author who wrote about the loss of her parents, but then also she's now a counselor for people going through grief. And she talked how important journaling is one of the exercises that she uses with the people that she goes through grief counseling with, because it allows you to tell the story and then also observe it, right? So, it's a way to get through it. It's a way to be present with those feelings. But then also, too, sometimes we have a way of telling a story, and it may not necessarily be true, right? And so I think that happens a little bit more when you begin the journaling and the talking about it after they've passed, versus what you did was using journalizing as a way of keeping present and also a way of processing. So, that's amazing.
Well, and I think it's important also to say that journaling doesn't work for everybody. Mm-hmm. I'm a writer and a lover of words and have been my whole life. And so for me, writing is my meditation. Actually, I've never been good at sitting meditation, but mm-hmm. I'm good at writing meditation, and it takes me into that deeper place. Mm. But there, I have friends that say they kind of tried it, it just doesn't work. But one of the things that I have found in my work with people, when I was doing coaching and working with people who were dealing with grief, is that any kind of a creative process, and people will say, oh, well, I'm not creative, but everybody has some way of creating. You may not even notice it. But if you're more a body-centered person, doing your yoga or your Tai Chi or walking, whatever it is that keeps your body moving. The body is very wise. You know, they've discovered that there are actually cerebral cells in the gut and in the heart as well as in the
Yeah.
brain. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're more of a body-centered person, if you can really be grounded in your body is going to help you process.
Yeah.
So what I think is important is figure out what works for you, because the most important thing that I learned about grief and that I learned in Stephen's passing, there are similarities in every process and everybody does it differently. Everyone's passing is unique to them. The family surrounded, which is one of the things that I appreciated about your book, is talking about the different reactions of your family members, you know, passing of your parents. So being kind and attentive and compassionate with self and others as far as what works for us, because the most deadly thing that we can do is should on ourselves.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You know, there are no shoulds.
Right.
There are only what do I need to do right now? What is needed of me right now? That's what's important. And if you already have some kind of a creative process, for example, if you're a painter, if you're an artist, if you sketch, if you're like my mother-in-law, she's a textile artist, she embroiders. Whatever it is, if you cook, you know, if you build something, whatever it is that expression for you of your deepest self, do that, do some of that, because what that's going to do is it's going to put you in touch with the beloved in your heart, with your true self, with your wise inner counselor that's going to show you the way.
Yeah. And, you know, these things also, you know, the second part of that, you know, the idea of journaling as a way to get through it is another way of helping you stay present.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so as we stay present, then we're actually not traveling back in time where we wish this never happened, or traveling forward and saying, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do without them. And, you know, and that happens, and I understand that, but also too, what that does is that, you know, that allows you to store up all of these feelings that you're having in your body that still have to be processed at some point in time. And so this gift of recognizing that doing things to help you stay present helps you with managing your grief process afterwards and the process of the loss, but then it also greatly helps your loved one and the other people that are around as well, because you're not in your head and considering everything that approaches you. I mean, I remember sometimes I would get so caught up in my head that I would, you know, be kind of short with other people, right? And, you know, that's, you know, that wasn't how I probably, you know, I look back and say, oh, that wasn't probably a really attractive way to wear grief, or, you know, the fear of loss that I was going through. And, you know, the goal of these conversations are to really kind of bring us to that point where we don't do that.
Yeah, because kindness it is. I mean, I said that number 3 is other people, but kindness all around, really, that's important, because
Yeah.
people do want to help, and people don't know how to help, and especially when your loved one has died. I found myself counseling, helping other people
Dealing with the loss.
because
Right.
they didn't know what to say to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would tell them stories and help them be comfortable, because we are such a death phobic society here, especially in America. My Irish friends say, I don't know what's going on with you Americans, you know, if you're Irish. I'm going back to Ireland in a few weeks, and they said, you know, if we don't talk about death before 11 in the morning, then something's going on. Because there's an organic comfortability and understanding of the flow of life, of the cycles of life that I find there. I think it's one of the things that attracts me to that culture, that we really need to learn that again, I think, in the States.
Yeah, no, I think that that'll probably be another area for me to explore, is how different cultures deal with these things, because I feel that is for certain true. And we've gotten to a point now, which I think I worry a bit about, is that we've almost sanitized it so much that, you know, and we're keeping kids away from it. We're keeping, you know, all of those things, and in such a way that then, they're even less prepared for when these things happen, right? I mean, I wouldn't say that my kids are prepared for when, they lose the next person that's really important to them, but I can say that they're better prepared by witnessing and me being as honest as possible through that process that I was going through, and me not hiding, so when relatives say, yeah, we go to a wake or we go to a service, we go to, you go, right? That's what you do. You show up.
Yeah, you show up, and it's really important. It's one of the things I talk about at the beginning of A Beautiful Death, that if Stephen was going to be married to someone who would be able to companion him through his passing, I was the perfect person, because my uncle was a mortician.
Wow.
And both my parents were from a small town in Missouri, and whenever we would go back in the summer, we would always go to the graveyards. We went to multiple funerals. When my grandfather died when I was 7, I went to the funeral. I remember my uncles crying, but what I really remember is being fascinated by how beautiful my grandfather looked in his coffin.
Wow.
And I was really grateful for that kind of experience growing up, because it was never a non-subject in our house.
Right.
We knew that people we loved got old or sick and died.
Mm.
And that's part of the deal.
Right. My dad used to say, and of course he's Irish, my maiden name is O'Boyle, right? He used to say, birth is a fatal illness. He's not seen anyone get out alive. And, when I was younger, that sounded very shocking. But, it really is what the truth is. I'd like to jump into the next area, which is you're now ready to, if not just, are you ready to publish, or are you ready to publish your new book? When is that coming out?
It's published. It's out. It's on Amazon.
So show us the book. I want to talk a little bit about this story. So this is called A Beautiful Joy, right? And this has a really, really unique authorship to it. So tell us a little bit about that.
Do you mean that I put Stephen's name on the cover?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Can people see that? Hold it up again. I want people to see that, because you actually acknowledged him. And now, how long has Stephen been? There you go. Perfect. And now, how long has Stephen been gone from the physical plane?
For almost 11 years.
All right. But he's written this book with you. So tell us about that.
The day after Stephen died, well, I have to preface this one more little story. So before he died, I mean, we had profound conversations the last couple of weeks of his life, and some really amazing experiences of what I would actually call a shared death experience. So there were a few things that I was able to see that he was seeing, or I was able to sense that he was sensing as he was crossing over. But he had told me, he said, don't try to find me. I'm going to be long gone in etheric levels of light, because that was his goal. And I thought, okay, fine, I believe you, because part of my test in this life was to believe him, because I kind of shoot from the hip and always thought everything through very carefully, and then would answer your question. So I said, okay, I believe him. Well, the day after he died, I woke up in the morning hearing there is joy in heaven. And what I realize now is that he was saying, I have found joy in heaven. And he transferred to me this unspeakable beauty, light, love, transcendent experience that he was having on the other side. And that lasted me for about half a day. And then, I was in the agony of him being gone. But it was that concept of joy that I've carried all along. And I don't know, several years ago, my team and I were talking, and I said, there's another book, and it's A Beautiful Joy. And I tried to stick the title on a whole bunch of other things that it never fit. And I'm glad, because this was it. So this book is really based on my very deep communion with Stephen's spirit, which has become closer and closer and closer to me over the years. I had a real healing in 2009, which I also talk about in A Beautiful Death. It's like, if you're going to read anything, read A Beautiful Death, because the whole story is in there.
It's a
Everything
good, yeah.
sort of elaborating on a beautiful. But I had a healing because I was torn apart, because he told me he wouldn't be here, and yet I kept having these experiences of feeling that he was close to me. And sometimes when I would be writing, I would hear his voice come through, and it was like I would be writing, but he would be speaking to me in my journal.
Would you hear it in your ears, or would you hear it in your mind? How would you hear it?
I would hear it in my mind. It wouldn't be an exterior sound. I would hear it in my mind, and I would feel it. And sometimes I would just sort of get an image of him. I mean, it was sort of a multi-sensory thing, but it was all happening on the inside.
Okay.
But sometimes it could be very loud and very insistent. So anyway, when I went to Ireland in 2009, I did have a healing where I reconnected with Stephen's spirit. And it sort of resolved that, no, he is actually here. He's here with me. And over the years, he's sort of gone. Sometimes I feel him go off to God school or off to a different planet or something. But there's always that tie. I talk about the silver thread that has us tied. So as I have written these other books, that tie has become stronger and stronger, until a couple of years ago, I would be writing and Stephen would write a poem. Can I read you that poem?
I would love it. Yep. I was going to ask anyway, so let's do it.
Yeah. So this sort of explains it, because I would not necessarily have had the courage to put Stephen's name on the cover, except that he wrote this poem, which is in the introduction now, of A Beautiful Joy, that is like, okay, we're doing this together. This is our book together. So this is called A Beginning. I am a spirit now, and not a man, though I was a man once or thrice or 1,000 times before. So I speak as incorporeal about the things of earth, of human love and loss, of work and play, of failure and success, of being and doing, of living life to the full, and drinking deeply of sorrow's cup, over leaving behind all I had come to cherish more earnestly than life itself. And finally, of transfiguration, as all my strivings were transformed into the ecstasy of love unbounded, of twin hearts linked by a silver thread, grown stronger in mutual devotion, while learning to dance upon the bridge twixt our two worlds, until reunion should call me to speak my peace. For peace it is, and perfect joy that are the substance of my life. This is the story I wish to tell, which surprises me that I should ever disclose, even from this imaginal realm, the secret self I kept tucked away from all but my beloved. Yet this is service, as I came to see when life broke my heart and I flew off to other worlds. Now to return, joined with my sweetheart, one in an orb of love's pure radiance, sublimely able at last to reveal the journey of my soul from darkness into light, or better said, from ignorance to illumination, to the joy of perfect unity that sparkles like diamonds or tears of recognition in my lover's eyes. I speak because she listens and knows my voice, sometimes better than her own. Come, join us now, attend with your full being, and witness what reunion can accomplish.
That's priceless.
That's Stephen. So there was no doubt. And so in this book, then, there are poems in Stephen's voice. There are poems in my voice. There are poems in the voice of the beloved, which I would say is probably that wise inner counselor in the heart. And then there are poems that came through from what I call the spirit of love. It's almost from a higher level. And they're mixed throughout. And what I've done so that the reader has a fighting chance of knowing who's speaking is that each poem has a little byline that says who's speaking. The first section, we actually start with poems are from two souls who are still in embodiment, who are striving for their union with the beloved, with the true self in the heart. And then one of them passes over. And then the other poems, the next section is learning to dance on the bridge, learning to actually make that connection between two worlds. And then we go on until the last parts are the ecstasy of love unbounded.
So, is this possible for others? Because this is a very beautiful experience. Is this unique or is this possible?
It is possible. And there's a bit of explanation that goes with that. The first thing I want to say is I recently found an article someplace online that was from a study from 2016 saying that 6 out of 10 people that they studied, and this was a pretty wide group of widowed persons, or some people who had, it wasn't just widowed persons, it was people who had lost someone close to them. 6 out of 10 of those people felt or heard communications with that deceased person, at least for a while. And I've had that experience. I remember when not even a close friend of mine died in a car accident, and I was with a whole group of people, and I remember hearing her say to me, "You were always kind to me." And that was the only thing I heard, but I did hear that loud and clear.
Yep.
And when another friend of mine, who was an extremely close friend, died, I was upset by how his illness and his passing was handled, because I've done quite a bit of work with hospice, and I know the importance of really handling the pain, because a body in pain has a lot of trouble actually relaxing enough to go ahead and make their transition. And I had felt that his pain wasn't well managed. It's really none of my business, but he had been he's like a brother to me, and I was upset about it. And I heard him say to me, "Cheryl, drop it." And I did. I went, "Okay,
Wow.
fine. Yeah, none of my business." So that's sort of the prelude to, I do believe, and Stephen even addresses this in the introduction that he wrote to A Beautiful Joy, is that if the survivors are attentive and open to the idea, especially when the person dies, because they're literally just over here. You know, the stories talk about they're just in another room.
Right.
So they're still very close, but they're having hopefully this experience that Stephen had, being in this light of love and joy and health and peace. And the thing they want their survivors to know is, "I'm fine. I love you. I'm sorry. Please be okay."
Yeah.
You know?
That's a common message that I've heard, even talking with some mediums who I've had on as well. And it's a message that so many people really, really want to hear. And I think that there's that literal desire for those connections. And it's comforting to hear that you said that 6 out of 10, believe that is the case. And I believe that that's true too. I think what these conversations and my goal has been is to help people see a really broad array of this whole thing about loss and grief, and to kind of give permission by sharing some really, really pretty extraordinary stories, some really practical stories, some really difficult stories, because there's so much thought, feeling, emotion, and learnings that have come up, and we don't have a broad stroke in this culture of understanding death, and this is a way to give ourselves permission.
Yeah. Can I offer one thing?
Please.
Yeah, that I learned in the process of writing A Beautiful Joy, and again, Stephen talks about this in his introduction, is that we've been poets many times before, so we knew that. Stephen and I knew that that was just, you know, something. And because what we used to do, even when we had our marriage challenges, which everybody has, it doesn't matter if you're twin flames or not, you're going to have your challenges.
Sure.
But we used to read together on Sundays. No matter what was going on, we would set aside time on Sunday morning, and a lot of what we read was poetry. And a lot of it was the romantic poets and spiritual poetry. And what we were actually doing was we were establishing the link that we would pick up on, that we would use to reconnect after he was gone. So, you know, that's one reason that I've written a lot of poetry. There's a lot of poetry in A Beautiful Death. And because that's actually the common language. Yes, we had many shared beliefs, but poetry was our common language. And that is what has allowed him to speak to me, and for me to be able to speak to him, to have this conversation between worlds, literally, because that was the language that we shared. And so I think that especially for people who are caregivers with a loved one, it doesn't have to be your spouse, it can be anybody, a friend, whoever it is that you are helping companion them through this journey, is it's part of that self-witnessing. What is our common language? What is, you know, how is it that we have this deep communion? Maybe it is in meditation. Maybe it's in a shared activity. You know, maybe it's going out for a hike. Well, go out for a hike and listen, be attentive, because that's a very practical way of keeping that communion. Now, it may be that the other person does need to actually go on. You know, every soul is different. So I can't say that everyone is going to be called to this kind of ongoing communion that Stephen and I do. I think it's particular to us as twin flames, because one of the other things that I learned is that with your twin flame, whoever they are, wherever they are in cosmos, is that tie, we share a blueprint. The blueprint of our identity is the same as the twin flame.
Yeah.
And so whatever we're doing for ourselves, for our own wholeness, accrues to the twin flame. And if they happen to already be on the other side, like Stephen is for me, his level of spirituality can also accrue to me. And so we're working together still on our combined mission for greater and greater wholeness on both sides. And so that may seem like kind of an esoteric concept, but it's actually very practical. If you think about whatever I do, I'm actually doing it, yes, for my own development, and I'm also doing it for my twin flame, wherever they are, because we are destined to meet at least on the inner,
Right.
if not outer.
Right. Exactly. And, you know, I think that, you know, in a broader concept, so if someone even isn't in a twin flame relationship of someone that they've lost, when you do this work, you know, it certainly is for yourself, but it is also for, you know, just all of us in general. It's really, really is a very universal thing. And as we work through our stuff and help others work through theirs, I think it really makes the world a better place. So I'm going to ask you one last question, because I'm so curious. Was there a thing that you might be able to share with us that really kind of surprised you once this connection, like something that you learned that you were like, get out, or whoa, something that really kind of shocked you a bit or surprised you?
From Stephen or just in general?
From whether it's from the connection or from Stephen, whether it's about his experience there that, you know, that you're also gaining and learning from, or if it was something that was just, you know, like a really big aha.
Well, I think it's something I actually told you about in our last conversation, and there's a poem about it in A Beautiful Joy. So I'm busy, totally consumed by this book, as you can imagine, because I'm really listening. I wrote most of A Beautiful Joy at night, when my brain is quieter, the world is quieter, and I could hear better because it was such a deep, profound communion that just had me completely consumed. And one day, I think I was unloading the dishwasher or something, and I heard grief say, "I am no longer your companion." And that totally shocked me, because you hear, and I think this is true, you never totally get over it. I mean,
Right.
You are forever changed. And what I've also said is that once you've been touched by the other world, which if we allow ourselves to be completely present with the passing, we cannot help but be touched by the other side. And if we allow that to happen, we will always be the same, and we will never be the same. We will always have a foot a little bit on the other side of that bridge. At the same time, I had come to accept that there would always be a part of me that was grieving. There would always be a part of me that, as much as I tried to focus on Stephen's presence, there would always be that point of separation.
His loss. Yeah, missing his physical presence, right?
Missing his physical presence. And so to hear grief say, "I am no longer your companion," I'm looking for this poem because I want to read it to you, was really a shock, because I didn't think that that would ever happen.
And that's amazing. And to me, it's very profound, and it's also very aspirational, because it makes me a little sad sometimes, to be honest, when I hear people say, like, "Oh, I'm always going to agree," or when I see posts, that, oh, because I do feel times like that too, but I also feel that the journey through it, and to really be present with it and to not shush it away, is the part that really, really helps us to embrace our life. And it becomes more about really just recognizing the ability to hold the presence of that person in your heart, whether it is something as beautiful on that continued bridge of a twin flame, or if it's just recognizing that you no matter how long they've physically been gone, the memories don't leave your mind. The love that you had doesn't leave your heart, right?
Right. And if anything, it actually grows stronger.
Right. It's not, there's no physical distance, right? There's none of the other day-to-day crap that we might have, which leaves each other when we're here, right?
I know. Oh my gosh. So I have one of my very, very dear friends lost her husband a few months before I lost Stephen. Tragic circumstances there. Not that Stephen's illness wasn't tragic, but his death was sudden. But she and I became each other's grief group. And we'd both been in theater and entertainment, and so we tended to share a slightly dark sense of humor once in a while. But we said, it's actually a lot easier being in love with a dead guy, because just because of all of the human stuff,
Yeah.
There's a line in one of the poems in A Beautiful Joy that I'm asking him, is it easier to love me from the other side?
Good question.
But what came out in the poem was that Stephen always saw my real self better than I did. And what some of the problems we had would be when he would be insisting on my being my real self when I was sort of into my stuff,
Sure.
But
That's
anyway,
great.
So grief, you can't make grief depart. The only way to help grief let go of you is by being fully present with it. Mm-hmm. And its dynamic and what it wants to teach you. And if that means that after a few years, one day you find yourself on the floor of your bedroom howling like a primitive animal because the grief is so great. Grief does what it's going to do. And we need to let it do that. And I think that that's one reason that grief could finally say, well, I'm letting go of you, because I've worked really hard to plumb the depths of my own experience and to learn from it and grow and be open and to be able to be taught the things that Stephen still wants to share with me, because he's over here in this great world, having all of these amazing experiences. And, I know I get just a fraction of it, but, I'm still listening. So do you want me to read this poem?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you have time for me to read this? Okay. So this is called When Grief Departs. I am no longer your companion, declared grief one day, an astonishing surprise to one who had surrendered to heartache's continuous company. I've taught you all I can, said grief, about perseverance and your determination to face me squarely, look me in the eye, and forge a new life through waves of disappointment and unavoidable sadness. When those who mourn learn my secrets, I must depart. And thus you've done, plumbing my depths, pushing back up from the bottom, catching your breath, then diving in again to explore the dim waters and dark caverns I hide from all but the most intrepid swimmers. Few know me as a light force, though I am the divine's answer to loss, given before you dare to ask. Tucked away in your heart of hearts, against the day when love would break you open, as it inevitably will, and send you running to the very core of all that is holy in your true self. Oceanic am I, and some think me cruel in my stirring of the body of sorrow. Still, you found me out and learned to surf my waves, transmuting darkness into light in fires of creativity. What am I if not a flame? Agent of refiner's fire, partner of my incandescent sister, joy, who leaps out from your fractured heart with golden gifts of pure insight, forgiveness, gratitude, and faith that love is ever stronger than death. I, grief, bid you adieu. My work is finished, at least for now. Should I appear at of our partnership, and lest you fear to entertain me again, Joy has promised to remind you of her precious gifts while she waits her turn to brighten the day. Few understand that we serve together, though we always have and always will.
It's just great. Well, that's a beautiful, beautiful way to help people understand what the gifts of grief are. And that's, that's something that that I found in a different way, but also agree with you that there's, by being present, there's so many gifts that pop up, and we don't necessarily always see them right away, but sometimes we do, and that's a blessing.
Yeah. So I just want to show this book, A Beautiful Grief, because this is a transition book. Now, one of the things I say to people about A Beautiful Death is it's the book to read before you need it.
Yeah.
If you're really in it. Now, I have heard from women who said, I read your book while my husband was dying and it helped me understand the stages. But not everybody can do that. So if you know anyone who is grieving or about to lose someone, A Beautiful Grief, because it's blog articles. It's short chapters that I wrote during the second year after Stephen was gone, the second and third year. And so it's more conversational, it's practical, and it is those things that were coming up for me. So we don't necessarily get all the way to beautiful joy immediately. I mean, this is a 10, but Stephen was originally diagnosed in 2004. So this is a 15-year journey to get to beautiful joy. Sometimes I'm kind of a slow learner. It takes me a while. So, again, everybody gets to where they're going to go at their own time. But a beautiful grief is a really good way to be kind to yourself. And if you don't know what to say to someone who's grieving, that can be a gift to them to help them find the gift in farewell.
Yeah. So tell our viewers where they can find you and how they can kind of reach out and learn more about your works. And
okay, well, I have the full legacy of my 20 years of work is all on my website at CherylEckl.com. And there are sections on death and dying. There's a section on grief. All of the books are listed there on the books page. And what I would really like to invite people to do is, you'll see at the top of the website, there's a place that says contact. I would love if you would click on that and send me a comment or send me a question, because I've been doing blogging off and on over the years, and I'm going to be doing more blogging. And what I would love to do is, if you have questions about any of the books, but particularly these three, A Beautiful Death, A Beautiful Grief, A Beautiful Joy, and also the Twin Flames book, my novel, The Weaving, is a book of twin flames through time. It's a very helpful way of understanding the challenges that twin flames have.
Yeah.
Anyway, go to the contact page and send me a note. I will answer you and would love to hear from you and see what kind of conversations we might start, because there's a lot to cover. There is.
I always find that sometimes those questions bring up new areas that, that you didn't even know you had wisdom on, or things that you really do want to develop some knowledge on as well, too.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was fascinating. I think it brought into the forefront a number of areas that should be really interesting, but also very comforting for a lot of people. So thank you so much for your time, Cheryl. It was awesome talking to you today.
You're so welcome, and thank you to Suzanne for connecting us. Oh my gosh, what an amazing!
Yeah, hey Suzanne.
I'm excited to know you and talk to you, and so thank you for the interview. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, and thank you to you, our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us today and listening to us while we help take on those tough topics to help you navigate your own pathway through loss and grief. So thank you from our heart to yours. Enjoy your day, and thanks for joining us on Comforting Hearts Conversations.